My name is Mary Beth Weaver. I'm 56 years old, and today is January 26, 2020. The location is Portland, Oregon, and I'm speaking with my friend.
Mark Rozanski. I'm 52. Today is the 26th of January 2020. We're here in Portland, Oregon. I'm speaking with my friend Mary Beth. Mary Beth, tell me about the community where you grew up.
I grew up an Army brat, so I grew up in about 5 different countries before I was age 8, and then settled when I was age 8 in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And that happens to be where my mom is from, Leavenworth, Kansas. And so when I was 13, my dad had to retire after 30 years in the Army, and they chose Leavenworth, Kansas to retire in. So for being an Army brat, even though the first few years were all over, I pretty much had a stable life from 8 years old on. And I was living on a pretty elite post Army base because it was a war college. And so it had officers and their families who were from the NATO officers and their families from all over the world coming to study for a year. And my dad was on faculty.
When you think of home, do you think of Kansas as home still?
I think when I was living there, because I was surrounded by everybody who was from somewhere else, I wanted to go and visit all those places. So there was this sense I grew up with of this extreme longing to explore and to see the world where everybody was coming from. I felt more a part of Fort Leavenworth than I did Leavenworth.
The city of.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was knowing that if I babysat all the time, that I could save my money so that I could go to these places. And France was on the top of my list. We had lived in Belgium for 2 years when I was little. That's what I did, was started babysitting and saved a lot of money. When I was in college, spent my sophomore year abroad.
That was your jumping off point for exploring the greater world.
I was steeped in it before I ever did it because the world was right there in Kansas. It wasn't like growing up in a wheat field. A lot of people would say, oh, wow, you grew up in Kansas. That must have been kind of boring. But it was actually really incredibly interesting because people from all over the world were there. And then when I was 13, we moved off post, and it shifted a lot, actually. And people in Leavenworth live there because there's 4 prisons. My classmate on my left, her father was a prison guard, and my classmate on my right, her father was in prison, and they had moved to Leavenworth to be able to visit him. So I went from this very elite kind of UN sort of very safe post to moving just 3 miles off post and a whole different world. And it was farmers and prisoners, basically. It was a great foundation for the work I'm doing now as a hospice chaplain.
How do you think that?
I meet people of all different backgrounds, and especially Providence really specializes in working with people who are the poorest and most vulnerable. Leavenworth was very much that. A lot of people in prison are very poor and very vulnerable, and their families too. And then Fort Leavenworth was actually a very ecumenical place because the main chapel on post was a Jewish synagogue on Saturdays and then had all the different Christian denominations on Sunday. So it was like growing up in a very ecumenical world religion kind of place that was desegregated. And that was also another thing that was huge because where I lived in Leavenworth, there were a lot of race riots in the 70s. But Fort Leavenworth was this haven where people all got along.
Do you have any memories of the race riots and of the civil disorder that was around you as a young person?
Yeah, we were driving home when I was 13 and a brick was thrown into our car. There was sort of a mob that we were driving through. Something had happened nationally. It was something to do with the war or something. It was in the early 70s. That was a blip. Then things went back to being peaceful, but it was a hard time. It was a really hard time, actually.
Tell me about your siblings.
I'm the middle of 3 kids, brother who's 2 years older, and a sister who's 2 years younger. His name is John, and her name is Julie. I wasn't as close to my brother. He kind of did his own thing, was very involved in sports. And my sister and I were very close, and still are to this day, are much closer. He went into the military, into special forces. My sister married into the military after she did a stint in the Peace Corps. Both of them I just found out about a month ago and a year ago that both of them have early-onset dementia, FTD, frontal temporal dementia. Been very hard because it's like I'm losing my best friend with my sister, and my brother is also being taken down by a very awful disease. I work with people with Alzheimer's, so I kind of know it's coming. And my parents are now gone, so it's just the three of us. And I know that if I were to have signs of this form of dementia, I would be exhibiting them now, like my siblings are. We think my mom had early onset Alzheimer's as well. She had FTD, we think. And so it's a hereditary thing in our family. Just finding that out now in this past year has been really hard. What's helping me right now is my relationships with people. I'm also on an online course taking this one called Compassionate Presence or Authentic Presence. And that's like StoryCorps in a way. It's listening to your own story and getting grounded in meditation practices so that you can be really authentically present to your patients. That's been really, really helpful, is doing that. It's helping me personally navigate through some really rocky times right now and figure out how to stay present.